f of x is not 1-to-1 because the graph is a parabola, which would not pass the horizontal line test. So f inverse of x does not exist, which you can write DNE. That does not exist because f of x is not 1-to-1. So on the ones that I did yesterday, some of them worked, some of them didn't. So you just have to go back and look at those. Yeah, quiet. Okay. Questions? I got it? All right. So G, another equation. Does anybody know what shape this would be? Yeah, it's going to be not a vertical or a horizontal. It's going to be a line with a slope. So you can graph it if you want to, but you know that I'm about to erase this, so don't feel like you have to write it down. But if it's a line, it's definitely going to pass the horizontal line test unless it's a horizontal line. So it does, or it is 1-to-1. So I would say f of x is 1-to-1 because the graph is a non-horizontal line which passes the horizontal line test. So f inverse of x exists because f of x is 1-to-1. So with all this writing, what I'm doing is I'm modeling to you what I need to see on free response questions. So when a free response question asks you if something has an inverse, and to justify it, I would need something like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be word for word, but I'm trying to model that same behavior so that you know what you're expected to do. Okay, so now we're going to actually do the inverse. This is something you've done before. So this isn't anything new. It's been a little bit since you've done it. So I'm going to replace f of x with y so that I have an x and a y, because whatever, if it's f of x or g of x or whatever, that always just means the y coordinate. And what did we do for the graph with x and y to find the inverse? What did we do here to find the inverse? Flipped it. I put the x's where the y's were and the y's where the x's were. That's exactly what I'm going to do here. X equals 2/5 y minus 3. And then we solve for y. Now all this stuff is written down, I believe, from yesterday. Let me find it. Yeah, right here. You switch places of x and y in the equation. solve the new equation for y, and then replace with inverse function notation. So that's what we're doing. So I solve for y, so what would I do to get y by itself? Not yet. Add 3. Yeah, I need to add the 3 first. Now I divide by 2/5. How do you divide by a fraction? Flip and multiply. So really, I'm multiplying by 5/2. Fives cancel, 2's cancel, just end up with y here. And over here, I would distribute the 5/2, so it's 5/2x plus 15 top times top, and then bottom times bottom is over 2. Last step is to put it in the right notation. This was f of x, so I would say f inverse of x equals 5/2x plus 15/2. And again, those steps are written out on yesterday's notes.
So we don't have to fill in any numbers and just make a chart like the other?
No. It depends on how you're given the problem. If it's given to you in a table, then you have to give the answer in a table. If it's given to you in a graph, then your answer needs to be in a graph. And we used a table to help figure that out. If it's an equation, then your answer needs to be an equation. Good question. Yes. The one down the way, because the other one is, she's here, but I think she's not in her office. Okay, then H. So what's the first thing we need to do? Figure out what?
The graph.
The graph. So that we can tell if it is horizontal line test. We're telling if it's 1-to-1. If it's a 1-to-1 graph, then it passes the horizontal line test and it has an inverse. If it doesn't, then it's not. So what kind of graph is this going to be? What shape? Yeah, a curve. Yeah, it's going to look like this. It's the square root graph. Now, you don't have to actually graph it. I'm going to erase it, but I know it goes left 3, up 4, and it's pretty steep, and something like that. But we know that whatever, a square root is always going to pass the horizontal line test. Now here, it looks like it's flattening out completely, but it's not quite. It's always going to be increasing a little bit. So yes, it does pass the horizontal line test. So it is 1-to-1. So it does have an inverse. So we would say g of x is 1-to-1 because the graph is half. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't like the way they wrote that. The graph is a square root graph, which passes the horizontal line test. So g inverse of x exists because g of x is 1-to-1. You can't have an inverse unless it's 1-to-1. And when you're given the graph, when it's 1-to-1, it passes the horizontal line test. We're used to the vertical line test. The vertical line test tells us if it's a function or not. Horizontal line test tells us if it's a 1-to-1 function. Okay, so how do we figure out what the 1-to-1 or the inverse is?